Gotcha, Tom.
I bet you nobody had a special sneak peek of Monomyth Episode 2 on their bingo card this week, but here it is, all wrapped up into this week's project. Now, alright, you two. Hey, Martin, I need Tam for a second. This is his video after all. So the story of Thomas, Tam, MacNamara starts with his family. The son of Iwan and Fiona, the entire MacNamara family work as bakers for Alden. So, for some context, let's talk a little bit about bakers in the Middle Ages. Now, bread has been a staple of the human diet since the first cultivation of grains, and the Middle Ages were no different. Bakers in the Middle Ages had to manage a unique and specific set of obligations and situations while providing food for their families, remaining in good favor with the monarchy, and maintaining their standing within the bakers' guilds. Bakers were oftentimes millers as well, taking on their own work of milling the grains in order to prepare flour for baking. Now, milling and baking were crafts governed by craft guilds. Each village or town's guild would determine a fair price of the loaf of bread, the fines for cheating or thievery, and the quality standards the bakers must maintain for their finished products. Now, in Alden, there's no actual guild per se, so they rely on the bakers' guilds in the closest big city, which is Glasgow. Bakers were generally townspeople and could earn additional income by lending their ovens to the nobles, who were required to provide public ovens for the use of their own serfs. Bakers needed to carefully manage their own obligations for daily baking for sale, baking for the community, and baking for their families, with the time they leased to nobles for public usage. And fines were steep, and quality was carefully controlled by the guilds, ensuring bakers would suffer severe penalties should they cheat their customers of the bread for which they had paid. Bakers who had fallen from favor could find themselves overwhelmed by work and unable to turn a profit as a result of the strict pricing regulations and the fines and levies to which they were subjected. So now let's talk about some types of bread. As you can see, Middle Ages bread was generally unleavened. The use of yeast as a leavening agent was not widespread until later in the Renaissance period. So yeast was instead reserved for pastries and desserts. Unleavened bread, however, was still made quite carefully in many specific varieties for different customers and occasions. Unleavened bread was dense and difficult to digest, so it was made thin, and pieces of unleavened bread were used as plates to hold the rest of the meal, which usually consisted of meat or fish. As the meal progressed, and the juices from the meal soaked through the bread itself became more flavorful and easy to eat, making it often the last part of the meal to be eaten. And is why we use bread rolls to this day for things like Thanksgiving dinner. Even as leavened breads began to rise in popularity, unleavened bread remained a staple of the diets of rich and poor alike. Unleavened bread was made available at feasts and banquets as well, served with rich foods that would ensure to impart juices, flavors, and sauces to the bread. God, all of this is making me hungry just thinking about it. The peasants ate rye, or barley bread, which was dark in color and coarsely ground. Rye and barley flour, when milled, could contain pieces of, tree bark, dirt, or other filler that blended unnoticeably with this darker brown color. Talk about a hearty bread. In response to this, white flour and its resulting white bread were developed as a way for the wealthy to feel confident they were receiving a superior product free of contaminants. This mindset persists in many people to this day who feel that white bread is more satisfying, tastier, or more exclusive than more natural-looking, darker breads. This is also why white bread is generally considered to be less healthy than darker breads, because it's less natural. Individual loaves of bread varied in size, color, shape, and textures. Bakers would develop specific recipes for different members of the community based upon their own preferences and needs. These loaves came to be known by names such as a king's loaf, a knight's loaf, a squire's loaf, and so on. Loaves of bread were usually designed to make one full portion size for an individual with a normal appetite, even with the crusts removed. In polite society, the man himself was given the loaf of bread and would offer the crust to the women present. Women would dip their crusts in soups or other foods in order to soften them before eating. And bakers in the Middle Ages also developed the first biscuits. Biscuits in their original form were simply bread baked twice, leaving it crispy, flaky, and easy to preserve. Biscuits remained edible for much longer periods of time than thin loaves of bread, making them ideal for long travels, wartime, and stored supplies of food for winter months. So here are some of the challenges that were faced by bakers. In addition to keeping up to date on rules and regulations, maintaining strict guidelines of quality, and managing their time and efforts in order to bake sufficient supplies of bread for the village, bakers faced some serious and often crippling problems. The economic and political instability of the time, along with increased rates of disease, could easily lead to famine and starvation within a community after simply one bad growing season. Because preserves were not available to keep bread fresh for long periods of time, there was no way to store and prepare for such occurrences. Instead, bakers had to make do with whatever ingredients were available, continuing to feed the village if resources were low or unavailable. During times of famine, the monarchy could and would step in and force bakers to make bread available at below market prices to prevent their populace from starving. In extreme situations, a baker's bread would simply be confiscated with no payment made and redistributed to those who needed it. Bread was a vital component of diet during the Middle Ages, and a lack of bread would rapidly lead to starvation and death rates that could rapidly decimate a village. Unfortunately, these losses would need to come directly from the baker's pocket and table. His own family may find themselves without bread to eat and without funding to continue acquiring the materials they need to remain in operation. Bakers in the Middle Ages were critical of importance to the health of their communities, but unfortunately were in a position to be hurt gravely by famine and economic difficulties. The establishment of bakers' guilds aimed to address the problem, but created its own problems as well by disallowing bakers to establish their own pricing or manage their own quality standards in the ways that would best allow them to earn a reasonable profit for their work. I think I should also note, bakeries had a nasty habit of starting fires because of how hot and how long the ovens would be running. For this purpose, often the baker's house and mill would be set apart from other houses in the area. Well, now that I've gone and piqued my own appetite, let's talk Tales of Atonement lore. So we first meet Tam. He's actually older than the rest of the boys in their friend group at 13 years old. He's Martin's best friend and has a keen interest in Patty, who's a solid year older. He's the eldest of the MacNamara children with 3 younger siblings, but in his early childhood, Tam had an older twin named Broderick, who sadly passed away as an infant. He is Martin's best friend because hanging around with the Riddell boys gives him a sense of belonging that he never got to experience with his own twin. Now, 13-year-olds in Scotland, especially boys at the time, had often started training in a skill, with as important as baking was to the livelihood of the villages in the Middle Ages. He took to baking with his parents, and even now will help with the daily baking quotas before he's allowed to go out with his friends. He's shy, gentle, dependable, and serious, with a down-to-earth attitude that serves him well as the type of friend who's not only good at keeping secrets, but good at recognizing when those he cares for are in over their heads. Often, he is the level-headed mediator between the Riddell siblings, who tend to look at him just like any other brother. He's devoted to Patty, seeing as they're the closest in age. He's bound and determined that they'll be married one day and bring baked goods and metalworking services to the next generation of their Highland home. As some of you might notice that I changed the colors around for this rendition of Tam from the 7 Elements video, and I even went back to edit that particular piece. I think these colors fit better with Tam being considered someone who exemplifies the element of earth, and it probably doesn't hurt that the flour he uses for bread is actually packed with trace amounts of soil, like we read earlier. Come and get your roughage, eh? Wow, everything smells so good. Maybe I'll have to try some of this unleavened bread with a big bowl of stew, chili, or a nice piece of lamb before this week is out. Thanks for watching, or for joining us for the first time. I hope you found the information interesting. I sure did. But that's all for now. Like, subscribe, and ring my bell so you can be notified with the next project on Thursday. And don't forget, our Patreon is open if you'd like to support us directly. Your monthly payment starts as little as $1, with various perks depending on which tier you choose. All links are in the description. This week's artist was Commenary on Fiverr. He's a 5-star rating and was highly responsive and collaborated well to make this artwork. So, I'll be putting a link to their business in the description so you can check them out on Fiverr as well. And I actually have 2 art shoutouts this week. The second one goes to Dimas Yuli, our comic book artist. He's helping us with the episodes and fleshing those out, and he was responsible for the preview that you saw, as well as the artwork for Eowyn and Fiona MacNamara. So their link to their business will be in the description as well, so you can check them out. They are highly recommended.